Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a closer look at the Fruit Belt Gang in Buffalo, New York.
Yeah, we've been going through some articles, some reports.
Right, trying to really understand, their origins, their activities, the whole context. The goal is just to pull out the key takeaways for you.
Absolutely. And the name itself, the Fruit Belt Gang, it really points you to the place, doesn't it? The Fruit Belt neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting from the sources is how they kind of emerged back in the 60s and 70s.
Right alongside the growth of the African American community there, apparently.
Exactly. It seems really intertwined with that specific time and place. And a big part of their story, we'll see, is this conflict, often violent, with the Central Park Gang.
Okay, so let's dig into that a bit more. The origins, the territory, the sources seem pretty clear. The gang established itself in the Fruit Belt area during the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, and like you said, not in a vacuum. It was happening while the African-American community was really growing and establishing itself there.
Makes you wonder, what else was going on socially, economically, things that might have, contributed.
Precisely. And the reports we saw, they often point to Jefferson Avenue and sort of the Cold Springs area around it as the initial hub.
So like a central street for them?
Seems like it. Probably vital for the community in general, which maybe made it a natural center for the gang's early days, too. And even today, their territory is still largely seen as the Fruit Belt, maybe some surrounding spots. Shows a pretty consistent presence.
And then it sounds like that territory became, contested ground when the Central Park Gang came onto the scene.
Oh, yeah. The sources really talk about violence ramping up between the two groups after that.
Painting a picture of ongoing clashes right there. Fruit Belt, Cold Springs.
For sure. And one source even gets really specific, mentioning Grave Street near Jefferson and High. Said it was a frequent spot for shootings linked to the Fruit Belt Gang. That kind of detail, it makes the rivalry feel very real, very localized.
Not just a vague conflict, but something happening on specific street corners.
Exactly. With tragic results, likely.
Okay, let's shift to their activities. The sources mention some really serious stuff. Racketeering is listed.
And murder.
Right, murder too, which immediately tells you the seriousness of the alleged crimes. Racketeering, just for clarity, that's like organized criminal activity, usually for profit, right?
Yeah, that's the gist. And then you add in the information about selling illegal narcotics, weapons.
Across state lines, apparently, into Pennsylvania.
That's what some sources suggest, yeah.
Yeah.
As a way to, fund their other illegal activities, it implies a certain level of organization, doesn't it?
It does. More than just street-level stuff. Planning, logistics.
And there was that specific incident mentioned, right? Pennsylvania state troopers arresting 5 people.
Yeah, associated with the gang, caught transporting illegal contraband. That's a pretty concrete piece of information supporting those interstate claims.
Definitely lends some weight to it. Makes you think about the scale of it all.
So, with all this alleged activity happening, how did the community react? The people living there?
That's a crucial point. And thankfully, the sources do touch on that. They mention initiatives aimed at preventing young people from getting involved.
Oh, good. Like what?
Well, specific groups were named. Buffalo Peacemakers, for one.
Okay.
And back to basics, outreach ministries. Local efforts, basically.
Trying to step in, guide kids away from gangs, from crime.
Exactly. Offering alternatives, maybe conflict resolution skills, things like that. It shows the community wasn't just, passively watching.
Which is important. These grassroots efforts are often so vital in tackling the root causes.
Definitely. Offering different paths.
Now, what about their reputation, their notoriety over time?
Well, it seems they really gained a negative reputation in the 1980s and 90s, mostly linked to violence.
Suggesting maybe things were more intense, or at least more public back then.
Could be. But it's not purely historical either. We saw a 2018 article that talked about summer violence still hurting the Fruit Belt neighborhood's image. So the impact, the association, it lingered.
Wow, okay. And didn't we also see a report from 2020? Something about a rise in shootings?
Yeah, a significant jump in shootings since June 1st of that year. Now, it didn't explicitly blame all of it on the Fruit Belt Gang.
Right.
But given their history and presence in the area, it suggests an ongoing issue with violence that they're likely part of.
And there was something else, Jamestown, a 2019 report.
Yes. Law enforcement out in Jamestown, which is, a ways from Buffalo.
Yeah.
They were reportedly looking for members of the Fruit Belt Posse. That was mentioned as another name for the gang.
So potentially extending their reach or influence, or maybe just members moving around.
Hard to say for sure from just that, but it does suggest connections beyond just the immediate Buffalo neighborhood.
Okay, so let's try to bring it all together. Our deep dive shows this group starting in the 60s, 70s in Buffalo's Fruit Belt neighborhood, tied into the community's growth then.
hmm And defined in large part by that really violent, long-running rivalry with the Central Park gang, playing out right there in the Fruit Belt in Cold Springs.
Then there are the alleged activities, serious stuff like racketeering, murder,
And the potential funding through uh, narcotics and weapon sales, possibly reaching into Pennsylvania.
but also importantly, the community response. Groups like the Peacemakers trying to counter it.
Right, not just letting it happen, trying to provide alternatives for young people.
And finally, their notoriety grew in the 80s and 90s, but the impact, the violence seems to have persisted even with possible connections outside Buffalo more recently.
Yeah, and it's worth saying again, this picture comes from the specific articles and reports we looked at today. It's a snapshot based on that information.
Definitely.
Mm.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Yeah, thinking about everything we've discussed, what are some of those deeper factors? Historical context, socioeconomic conditions.
Hmm.
That might play into why groups like this form and stick around in places like the Fruit Belt.
And related to that, what are the real complexities in trying to tackle gang violence effectively? It's obviously not simple.
Not at all. It involves so much more than just policing, community resilience, opportunity, layers upon layers, something to definitely think about.